Hello, welcome to Goodnight Flagstaff. I'm Jamie Paul, one of your librarians at the downtown library and a lover of people reading out loud. You may have noticed that we accidentally had 2 chapter 5s in a row if you were paying attention. Good job, Jill. I messed up when I sent people the scripts. It was totally my fault. But I felt like you can never have too much reading out loud, so we went with it. Tonight, we're going to have chapter 6, and then we'll continue on in the regular fashion for the rest of Prince Caspian. I was also looking at our book schedule, and I'm so excited about the books that are coming up. Woohoo! We're starting a Facebook group where we'll be posting videos as well as the YouTube place. And we're thinking we could also host some art contests and some fan fiction contests there, along with the Literacy Center. It's going to be so cool. So start getting excited about that. It's happening now. And the next book after the Chronicles of Narnia are over, which will be Race to the Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. Very exciting. And then we move on to The Lord of the Rings plus The Hobbit. All 4 of them. Big fun coming ahead. But now, back to good old Prince Caspian. Thank you for tuning in to our community story time. You can find a new chapter from a community-selected family-friendly book at 8 p.m. each weeknight on the Literacy Center's YouTube channel and on Crater Radio, a local online radio station. The previous chapter is always replayed on Crater Radio each weeknight at 7:45, just before the new chapter airs. You can also listen to all previous Goodnight Flagstaff recordings on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. Now we have a really easy link where you can just go to tiny.cc/goodnightflagstaff and you'll get to the playlist for the current book on YouTube. Very exciting again. We are currently reading from the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis, and we are on book 4. Well, the order of the books is somewhat controversial, but we are going to call it Book 4, Prince Caspian. If you'd like to check out any of the Narnia books to read along with us at home, they are all available in the Hoopla app with your Coconino County Library card, so you could check one out today and read with us. Please email us if you'd like to join our team of readers and connect with your community through shared story time. All ages are welcome. Our email is goodnightflagstaff@gmail.com. The last time we read together, Caspian was learning more about the wonderful creatures and stories of old Narnia. Caspian's tutor, Cornelius, told him about talking animals, living trees, the ancient kings and queens from another world, and above all, Aslan. During the night, Cornelius came to Caspian in a panic and told them that he must leave immediately, for his aunt has just given birth to a son, an heir directly related to Miraz that makes Caspian unnecessary. Before sending him away to Archenland to seek asylum, Cornelius gave Caspian the horn of Susan, a treasure said to summon heroes of old in times of need. As Caspian flees his home, he is knocked from his horse and wakes in the strange company of 2 dwarves and a talking badger. And now, finally, after I babbled on, chapter 6, The People That Lived in Hiding. Now began the happiest times that Caspian had ever known. On a fine summer morning when the dew lay on the grass, he set off with the badger and the 2 dwarfs up through the forest to a high saddle in the mountains and down on to their sunny southern slopes, where one looked across the green wold of Archenland. "We will go first to the 3 bulgy bears," said Trumpkin. They came in a glade to an old hollow oak tree covered with moss, and Truffle Hunter tapped with his paw 3 times on the trunk, and there was no answer. Then he tapped again, and a woolly sort of voice from inside said, "Go away! It's not time to get up yet!" But when he tapped the 3rd time, there was a noise like a small earthquake from inside, and a sort of door opened, and out came 3 brown bears, very bulgy indeed, and blinking their little eyes. And when everything had been explained to them, which took a long time because they were so sleepy, they said, just as Truffle Hunter had said, that a son of Adam ought to be king of Narnia, and all of them kissed Caspian, very wet, snuffly kisses they were, and offered him some honey. Caspian did not really want honey without bread at that time in the morning, but he thought it was polite to accept. It took him a long time afterwards to get unsticky. After that, they went on till they came among tall beech trees, and Truffle Hunter called out, "Patch twig, patch twig, patch twig!" And almost at once, bounding down from branch to branch till he was just above their heads, came the most magnificent red squirrel that Caspian had ever seen. He was far bigger than the ordinary dumb squirrels which he had sometimes seen in the castle gardens. Indeed, he was nearly the size of a terrier, and the moment you looked in his face you saw that he could talk. Indeed, the difficulty was to get him to stop talking, for like all squirrels, he was a chatterer. He welcomed Caspian at once and asked if he would like a nut, and Caspian said thanks, he would. But as Pattertwig was bounding away to fetch it, Truffle Hunter whispered in Caspian's ear, "Don't look! Look the other way! It's very bad manners among squirrels to watch anyone going to his store, or to look as if you wanted to know where it was." Then Pattertwig came back with the nut, and Caspian ate it. And after that, Pattertwig asked if he could take any messages to other friends. "For I can go nearly everywhere without setting foot to ground," he said. Truffle Hunter and the dwarf thought this a very good idea, and gave Pattertwig messages to all sorts of people with queer names, telling them all to come to a feast and council on Dancing Lawn at midnight, 3 nights ahead. "And you'd better tell the 3 Bulgies, too," added Trumpkin. "We forgot to mention it to them." Their next visit was to the 7 brothers of Shuddering Wood. Trumpkin led the way back to the saddle and then down eastward on the northern slope of the mountains till they came to a very solemn place among rocks and fir trees. They went very quietly, and presently Caspian could feel the ground shake under his feet as if someone were hammering down below. Trumpkin went to a flat stone about the size of the top of a water butt and stamped on it with his foot. After a long pause, it was moved away by someone or something underneath, and there was a dark, round hole with a good deal of heat and steam coming out of it, and in the middle of the hole the head of a dwarf, very like Trumpkin himself. There was a long talk here, and the dwarf seemed more suspicious than the squirrel or the bulgy bears had been, but in the end the whole party were invited to come down. Caspian found himself descending a dark stairway into the earth, but when he came to the bottom he saw firelight. It was the light of a furnace. The whole place was a smithy. A subterranean stream ran past on one side of it. 2 dwarves were at the bellows. Another was holding a piece of red-hot metal on the anvil with a pair of tongs. A 4th was hammering it, and 2, wiping their little hands on a greasy cloth, were coming forward to meet the visitors. It took some time to satisfy them that Caspian was a friend and not an enemy, but when they did, they all cried, "Long live the king!" and their gifts were noble. Chainmail shirts and helmets and swords for Caspian and Trumpkin and Knickerbrick. The badger could have had the same if he had liked, but he said he was a beast, he was, and if his claws and teeth could not keep his skin whole, it wasn't worth keeping. The workmanship of the arms was far finer than any Caspian had ever seen, and he gladly accepted the dwarf-made sword instead of his own, which looked, in comparison, as feeble as a toy and as clumsy as a stick. The 7 brothers, who were all red dwarves, promised to come to the feast at Dancing Lawn. A little farther on, in a dry, rocky ravine, they reached the cave of 5 black dwarfs. They looked suspiciously at Caspian, but in the end the eldest of them said, "If he is against mirage, we'll have him for king." And the next oldest said, "Shall we go farther up for you, up to the crags? There's an ogre or 2 and a hag that we could introduce you to up there." "Certainly not," said Caspian. "I should think not, indeed," said Truffle Hunter. "We want none of that sort on our side." Kind of mean. Knickerbrick disagreed with this, but Trumpkin and the badger overruled him. It gave Caspian a shock to realize that the horrible creatures out of the old stories, as well as the nice ones, had some descendants in Narnia still. "We should not have Aslan for friend if we brought in that rabble," said Truffle Hunter as they came away from the cave of the black dwarfs. "Oh, Aslan!" said Trumpkin, cheerily but contemptuously. "What matters much more is that you wouldn't have me." "Do you believe in Aslan?" said Caspian to Nickabrick. "I'll believe in anyone or anything," said Nickabrick, "that'll batter those cursed Telmarine barbarians to pieces or drive them out of Narnia. Anyone or anything. Aslan or the White Witch. Do you understand?" "Silence, silence," said Truffle Hunter. "You do not know what you are saying. She was a worse enemy than Miraz and all his race." "Not to dwarfs, she wasn't," said Nickabrick. Their next visit was a pleasant one. As they came lower down, the mountains opened out into a great glen or wooded gorge, with a swift river running at the bottom. The open places near the river's edge were a mass of foxgloves and wild roses, and the air was buzzing with bees. Here Truffle Hunter called again, "Glenstorm! Glenstorm!" And after a pause, Caspian heard the sound of hooves. It grew louder till the valley trembled, and at last, breaking and trampling the thickets, there came in sight the noblest creatures that Caspian had yet seen, the great centaur Glenstorm and his 3 sons. His flanks were glossy chestnut, and the beard that covered his broad chest was golden red. He was a prophet and a stargazer, and he knew what they had come about. "Long live the king!" he cried. "I and my sons are ready for war. When is the battle to be joined?" Up till now, neither Caspian nor the others had really been thinking of a war. They had some vague idea, perhaps, of an occasional raid on some human farmstead, or of attacking a party of hunters if it ventured too far into these southern wilds. But, in the main, they had thought only of living to themselves in woods and caves and building up an attempt at old Narnia and hiding. As soon as Glenstorm had spoken, everyone felt much more serious. "Do you mean a real war to drive Miraz out of Narnia?" asked Caspian. "What else?" said the centaur. "Why else does your majesty go clad in mail and girt with a sword?" "Is it possible, Glenstorm?" said the badger. "The time is ripe," said Glenstorm. "I watch the skies, Badger, for it is mine to watch, as it is yours to remember. Tarva and Alanbil have met in the halls of high heaven, and on earth a son of Adam has once more arisen to rule and name the creatures. The hour has struck. Our council at the dancing lawn must be a council of war." He spoke in such a voice that neither Caspian nor the others hesitated for a moment. It now seemed to them quite possible that they might win a war, and quite certain that they must wage one. As it was now past the middle of the day, they rested with the centaurs and ate such food as the centaurs provided, cakes of oaten meal and apples and herbs and wine and cheese. The next place they were to visit was quite near at hand, but they had to go a long way round in order to avoid a region in which men lived. It was well into the afternoon before they found themselves in level fields, warm between hedgerows. There, Truffle Hunter called at the mouth of a little hole in a green bank, and out popped the last thing Caspian expected, a talking mouse. He was, of course, bigger than a common mouse, well over a foot high when he stood on his hind legs, and with ears nearly as long, though broader, than a rabbit's. His name was Repeat Cheap, and he was a gay and martial mouse. He wore a tiny little rapier at his side and twirled his long whiskers as if they were a mustache. "There are 12 of us, sire," he said with a dashing and graceful bow, "and I place all the resources of my people unreservedly at your majesty's disposal." Caspian tried hard, and unsuccessfully, not to laugh, but he couldn't help thinking that Reepicheep and all his people could very easily be put in a washing basket and carried home on one's back. It would take too long to mention all the creatures whom Caspian met that day. Clodsley, Shovel the Mole, and 3 hard biters who were badgers, like Truffle Hunter, Camilla the Hare, and Hogglestock the Hedgehog. They rested at last beside a well at the edge of a wide and level circle of grass, bordered with tall elms which now threw long shadows across it, for the sun was setting. the daisies closing, and the rooks flying home to bed. Here they supped on food they had brought with them, and Trumpkin lit his pipe. Knickerbrick was not a smoker. "Now," said the Badger, "if only we could wake the spirits of these trees and this well, we should have done a good day's work." "Can't we?" said Caspian. "No," said Truffle Hunter. "We have no powers over them. Since the humans came into the land, felling forest and defiling streams, the dryads and naiads have sunk into a deep sleep. Who knows if ever they will stir again? And that is a great loss to our side. The Telmarines are horribly afraid of the woods, and once the trees moved in anger, our enemies would go mad with fright and be chased out of Narnia as quick as their legs could carry them." "What imaginations you animals have," said Trumpkin, who didn't believe in such things. "But why stop at trees and waters? Wouldn't it be even nicer if the stones started throwing themselves at old Miraz?" The Badger only grunted at this, and after that there was such a silence that Caspian had nearly dropped off to sleep when he thought he heard a faint musical sound from the depths of the woods at his back. Then he thought it was only a dream and turned over again. But as soon as his ear touched the ground, he felt or heard, it was hard to tell which, a faint beating or drumming. He raised his head. The beating noise at once became fainter, but the music returned clearer this time. It was like flutes. He saw that Truffle Hunter was sitting up staring into the wood. The moon was bright. Caspian had been asleep longer than he thought. Nearer and nearer came the music, a tune wild and yet dreamy, and the noise of many light feet, till at last, out from the wood into the moonlight, came dancing shapes, such as Caspian had been thinking of all his life. They were not much taller than dwarfs, but far slighter and more graceful. Their curly heads had little horns. The upper part of their bodies gleamed naked in the pale light, but their legs and feet were those of goats. "Fawns!" cried Caspian, jumping up, and in a moment they were all around him. It took next to no time to explain the whole situation to them, and they accepted Caspian at once. Before he knew what he was doing, he found himself joining in the dance. Trumpkin was heavier and dirtier, but he did likewise, and even Truffle Hunter hopped and lumbered about as best as he could. Only Knickerbrick stayed where he was, looking on in silence. The fawns footed it all round Caspian to their reedy pipes. Their strange faces, which seemed mournful and merry all at once, looked into his. Dozens of fawns, Mintius and Abintinus and Dumnus and Volans and Vultinus, Gerberus, Neminius, Nausus, and Oskins. Pattertwig had sent them all. When Caspian awoke next morning, he could hardly believe that it had not all been a dream. But the grass was covered with little cloven hoof marks. Thank you for joining us for Chapter 6 of Prince Caspian, the fourth book in the Chronicles of Narnia. Please join us tomorrow night for Chapter 7, Old Narnia in Danger. Thank you. Good night, Flagstaff.